Hello, Sat Shri Akal, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the live of Right Directions again. My name is JELTS Kaur, and I'm the Senior Master Trainer in IELTS at Right Directions. Now today, I have come live with the speaking module in your IELTS exam. So far, we have conducted a lot of live sessions and I have given a lot of strategies and the tips on the IELTS speaking module to you all. I even explained giving you some templates that you could practice for your part 1 and your part 3 in your speaking module. And in my previous live, I shared a list of cue cards and told that I would come up with the explanation in my next live. So today, I have come live with the same. Now, the part 2 in your speaking module is the part where many students find a lot of difficulties, because you need to talk for 2 minutes on one particular topic. That obviously becomes a lot difficult. So let me help you out today by explaining all different types of cue cards so that you may find it's really simple and easy to explain when you sit for your final interview. Now, what I would cover today is the types of cue cards and the hints and tips on every type of cue card. Okay, so let's move forward now with the live. First, let me tell you the tips to be master at IELTS cue cards. Now, as you all might be aware that IELTS cue cards change every 4 months. So this means that it is almost impossible for the students to know and prepare for, 50 to 60 of your cue cards. Now, your part 2 in your speaking test is supposed to test your ability to speak naturally, students. Not to test your ability to memorize the pre-prepared answers. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff on the internet these days. You may even have the PDF files where you have a lot of cue cards, the topics with some sample answers. So what most of the students do is they just memorize those answers and they deliver the same answers in their final speaking test. This is the reason why they end up at, having a band score of 6 or 6.5. So, I suggest not to deliver the crammed answers when it comes to your part 2. Okay? Try to develop your own ideas. Be as natural as you can. Now, many students are afraid of part 2. Again, as I told, speaking for 2 minutes without stopping is hard, and it is unnatural to do so without any person you're talking to responding to you in any way. That means without any interruptions, you have to continue speaking for 2 minutes. Obviously, that's, quite difficult. So this is the reason why I will describe some techniques that you can use to keep going with your part 2 in your IELTS speaking, even when you run out of ideas. Okay? Now, I have shared this list in my previous live as well. Okay? And what I have done is, students, there are, numerous of topics that could be asked in your speaking test when you sit for your individual interview round. So what I have done is I have just put different cue cards in 9 different types. Okay, I have just categorized the cue cards into 9 different types of cue cards. Let me just put some light on these. The first category is the cue cards that ask you to describe an event in the past. The next category is the cue cards that ask you to describe a person. Okay, moving next, the cue cards that ask you to describe a habit. Then the cue cards that ask you to describe an object. The next category is the cue cards that ask you to describe a place. Then we have the cue cards that ask you to describe a hypothetical desire. Just don't worry about these type of cue cards, as I am going to explain every category of cue card in this live of mine. Okay, moving to the next category, we have cue cards that ask you to describe a favorite thing. Then cue cards that ask you to describe a cultural event or an item. And the last category is cue cards that ask you to describe something crazy. Okay, I hope that this effort really would be fruitful, okay, so that you can just have good explanation part when it comes to your cue card explanation. Great, so let's see what we have now. The very first category is the cue cards that ask you to describe an event in the past. Now, what is important over here is the tense. There are many topics that fall under this category. I have taken a good example over here. Okay, and the topic is describe a time when the internet helped you to solve a problem. I repeat, describe a time when the internet helped you to solve a problem. Now just pay attention. This is probably the most common type of cue card, and one that you definitely have to be prepared for. Why you need to be prepared for this type of cue card? Because students are these days, internet is the major tool that's used by almost everyone. Yeah? For different purposes, people use the internet. Fine? So you may get different sort of, you can say, topics on the usage of internet. Okay? It can be to solve a problem. It can be, you can say, to prepare for any exam. Okay? It can be about anything. Fine. Now, the main problem for students here is using the past tense throughout the response. Of course, students, it's quite, you can say, challenging when you have to continue speaking in one particular tense. Now, even the high-level students can drift from the past to the present if they are not careful. So what you have to do is take particular care of simple verbs. Verbs like have and be. Because these tend to be the ones that slip back into the present. Obviously, there are a lot of students who even get confused, in the usage of are, were, is, was. So when you just focus on the story you are telling, you just, drift from one tense to the other. Okay? Now, what are my top tips for past cue cards? The very first tip is make sure you always stick to the past tense to describe the past. Please, students, take care of your tenses, because your tenses are the very first, you can say, factor that is checked, or that you can say affects your speaking module. Okay? Tip number 2 is remember to give context at the start of your story. What I mean is, your examiner does not know you. So you might have to give extra details to make your narrative flow. Okay? In simple words, whatever story you have to tell in your cue card explanation, just give a start of the same in the starting sentences. Clear? Let's move to the tip number 3. Add details to your story to make it flow naturally and to fill the time. This is really important, students. Remember, you need to cover all of the bullets in your response. Bullets mean the questions, the sub-questions that you have just below your main topic statement. Okay, but also focus on the story you are telling. Don't get diverted from the story, students. Okay. Then, the second category. That is the cue cards that ask you to describe a person. Again, you can have a lot of topics that fall under this category, as talk about a person, who is famous in your town or in your city, or describe an old person that is important to the society. Okay? I have taken an example as describe an interesting old person that you have met. Okay? Now, let's imagine that you're in a cafe, okay, and a friend of yours asks you to describe your mom or your dad or your sister or like anyone close to you. So what you would do at that time? So, after you have told the person their age and what they do, you might start to list adjectives. Why adjectives? To describe them. For example, they are funny, beautiful, kind, friendly, etc. Okay? So, now adjectives are pretty much what everybody uses when they are asked to describe a person. And believe me, students, they are a great thing to use in the speaking exam. The only problem is that you would need to have a long list of adjectives to speak for 2 minutes of time. Okay? So that's why we recommend that every time you give an adjective to describe a person, you give a real life example to extend your answer. I have just taken one example over here, and that's quite simple. The example is, rather than saying my grandfather's friend Kenny is really generous, that would approximately take you 10 seconds. You can say, my grandfather's friend Kenny is generous. I remember once we were sitting in his home talking about cooking. And when I mentioned that I really loved making cakes, he gave me a recipe book for fat-free cakes. Another time you can just continue your story. Okay? So this would cover 20 seconds of your time and you can just move naturally into that flow of explaining the topic. Okay? This is quite helpful when you have to cover your time of 2 minutes. Okay then, let's move to the tips now. So top tips for cue cards on people. The very first tip is, don't rely only on adjectives, as there are a lot of other things to focus, students. Okay. Now, the tip number 2 is give examples, anecdotes that will help you describe the person in detail. Now, what are anecdotes? Anecdotes are, the short, interesting stories about any, you can say, real person or any event. Clear? Okay then. Let's move to the next category of cue cards. Now, the cue cards that ask you to describe a habit. Now, again, a lot of topics can be asked on your habits. An example, Describe something that you do that helps you to relax. You can even have a topic as describe a bad habit that you gave up. Okay? I have taken today an example as describe something that you do that helps you to relax. Now, habits are things that you usually do. Am I right? And therefore, cue cards that ask you about your habits will require you to answer using mostly the present simple tense. Okay? Although the present simple is often the very first tense that we learn, many have problems with this tense. Why many of you have problems with this tense? As you often use present continuous instead. Okay? For example, rather than saying, I go for a walk to relax, what most of the students say is, I am going for a walk to relax. This is the present continuous, students. You don't have to use that. So if you recognize this particular problem, you need to be careful. So my tip is, try using the present simple when you talk about the things that are always true. That are always true. Okay? Moving next. Also, it can be hard to talk about one habit for 2 minutes. Of course, let's imagine like I'm talking about the same topic. Okay? So, what you do to relax is walk. Can you really talk about walking for 2 minutes? I mean, you can talk about where you go for a walk and why you do walking. But then again, it could only cover more than, you can say, 60 seconds of your time. So now, how you can extend your speech when you talk about habits? Here I am with an explanation. I would encourage you to tell the story about how you developed the habit. Like, who inspired you to take up that habit, or whether something happened that really, you can say, forced you, or that inspired you to take up that habit or develop that habit. Okay? And, it can also be a specific example of doing it. Like, when you do it, or the process, of doing it. Okay? That is a time you went on a really memorable walk. Students, again, I would like to just say, use the 2PF formula when it comes to your cue card explanation. What it means? Present, past, future, or rather the past, present, and future tense. What I mean is, when you have less number of ideas, start your story from the past tense. But remember to stick to the past tense at that time. Then jump to the present, and at the end just, talk about the future. It really boosts your band score and, makes your storytelling easy. Okay? Now, obviously for specific examples, you will switch to the past tense, as I have just explained the 2PF formula. So again, be attentive to make sure that you stay in the past. Finally, don't be afraid of talking about 2 habits, but you have to do that if you run out of things to say about the first. If you're having less number of ideas to talk about the one habit for 2 minutes, the last option we have is to talk about another habit of yours. So this is always the best and easiest way to extend. Okay? All you have to say is, another thing I do to relax is, let's say that another thing I do to relax is listening to music. Okay? But then again, add a totally new habit But remember, keep it connected to the previously described habit, students. Connectivity is always important. Okay? Otherwise, you just lose your control over the explanation of your cue card. I hope I'm being clear in my ideas. Okay, top tips for the cue cards on habits now. Use the present simple to describe the habit itself. Tell the history of your habit or a specific example in the past to extend your speech. Describe two habits. If you run out of ideas for the first, students, keep this as the last option, please. Okay? Otherwise, many of you even have a habit of starting from the explanation of two habits from the beginning of your topic. That makes your cue card much complicated to explain. Okay? Fine. So keep this as your last option. Okay. So another category is cue cards that ask you to describe an object. Again, I have taken an example over here. Describe a popular product which is made in the region you come from. Now you can talk about any product, students. As I am from Haryana, so I can talk about a product that is earthen pot, mitti ka ghada, and that is quite popular in our region, I guess. Okay? Now, what are the problems that students face when describing an object is? What the problem is? Lexes, students. Vocabulary. Not many students have enough vocabulary to be able to describe their favorite shoes. That's a product. Describe their favorite shoes or a laptop for more than 30 seconds. Okay? Then, to resolve this issue, what we can do is, you either have to broaden your vocabulary, which is always a good idea, students. Okay? Or learn how to talk about the personal meaning an item has for you. This means what type of connection do you have with that particular product? Like why you are emotionally attached, okay, or what the product actually means to you. Okay? Now it is quite easy, okay, then giving a physical description of the product. For this example, I would like to focus on why the product is popular, rather than an actual description of the product, which is obviously hard. Now, making comparisons can be a great way of making a simple description of a complicated product. What I mean is, you can just compare that product with another product. Okay? This would make it simple and easier for you to explain your topic. I have taken an example over here. Now it is much easier to say. So I'm going to describe a balalaika, which is a type of musical instrument, a bit like a guitar. Now this is really easy. Okay? If you say, so I'm going to describe a balalaika, which is a 3-stringed musical instrument that has a triangular body and a fretted neck. Obviously, it takes, a lot of efforts to explain. Okay, so comparisons are always welcomed. Clear, students? Moving next. Now, the top tips for cue cards on objects. The very first tip over here is make sure you have the vocabulary to describe object cue card topics. That is screen, buttons, applications, crack, etc. Whatever you can explain. Okay? Tip number 2 is it is often easier to make a comparison than to describe an unknown object. Okay? How you can connect this? It is like a guitar, as I did previously. Okay. I hope this would really work wonders for you students. Okay then. Moving to the next category. The cue cards that ask you to describe a place. I have taken an example as describe a place you remember going to that was full of color. You can even have the topic in this way, describe a place that was colorful, or describe a colorful place you visited. Okay? Now I think that cue cards that ask you to describe places are similar to those that ask you to describe objects. Why these are similar? Because they are testing your vocabulary, students, as you have to use a lot of words to explain a particular place or a particular object. Okay? So now you're going to struggle describing a building over here if you don't know the basic words like ceiling, roof, wall, carpet, etc. In the same way, describing towns without knowing phrases like city center, in the suburbs, on the coast, or close to the mountains is also going to be difficult. There are no real shortcuts over here, students. When you have to talk about a particular place or an object, you should be specific in your explanation. Okay? So, just get hold of a good IELTS vocabulary book. Now, we at Right Directions have a vocabulary book. Okay? Fine. So, anyone out there can just ask for the same from our team at Right Directions. Okay? Now, make sure that you have some good phrases to describe your local area. Students, you should be much familiar with your local area. Okay? Now, top tips for cue cards on places. Make sure that you have enough lexis, that is enough vocabulary to describe the towns, the cities, the buildings. I mean, you should have the collection of words to talk about different kind of facilities available, okay, to talk about the infrastructure of that particular place, okay, or to talk about the beauty of the buildings, okay, and a lot more. Clear? Then, moving forward to the explanation, I have another category of cue cards, that is the cue cards that ask you to describe a hypothetical desire. You might be confused with the word hypothetical. This word means something that has actually not yet happened. Okay? Fine? That is, it's not based on facts. Clear? Now, many different topics fall under this category, students. I have taken one example again over here, and it says that describe an outdoor sport you would like to try, okay, in future, or describe an outdoor sport you would like to try. These types of cue cards can confuse the weaker students. Why? Because this question is not asking what you like doing. It's not about something you already do, students, but what you would like to do. That is something you dream about doing in the future. Okay? So if you had the cue card in the example, you would need to describe an outdoor sport that you have never tried, but would like to one day. That means you have not tried it yet, but you want to try it in your future. So explaining, these type of cue cards become really challenging for the students who are the beginners, okay, or who are the weak, students. Okay. Now, in other words, this type of card is testing to see if you can talk hypothetically, which can be obviously hard, students. Now, I have found that students often struggle to fill the 2 minutes when they are given a hypothetical card, because they are talking about an experience that they have not had yet, which is much harder than talking about a true memory. Obviously, it also happens with me, as if I have to talk about something that I have already experienced in my life, it's quite easy for me and I can just talk for 10 to 15 minutes to 1 hour on the same. But whenever you have to talk about something that you want to do in your future, or like something you don't have any idea about, you have not done it, you have not done it before, it becomes really close to impossible to explain the same, as you have to think a lot, you have to just cook story, okay, and you have to even be correct and accurate at your explanation. Fine. Now, I would roughly follow a plan, if I get something like that in my final exam. So just to extend my talk, what I would do is, I would react to the question. Reacting to the question mean, have you thought about this before? If you have not thought about this before, why not? Okay? Then reason, that is why you have opted for this particular thing to do in the future. What's the reason why you want to do this? Okay, so you can discuss the same. You can discuss the reason in your explanation part. Then we have evaluate. This means how realistic is it that you will actually do this thing one day. That means showing your interest about the activity you want to do in your future. How much interested you are in that particular activity. Okay? Now, top tips for hypothetical cue card topics. The very first tip here is recognize that the card is asking you to describe an experience you have never had. You need to just realize this, that this particular topic is about an experience that you have never had. So you need to put a lot of ideas. Okay? Tip number 2 is extend your speech using the 3 steps. The 3 steps that are explained before. That is, react to the question, give reason, and evaluate. Clear? Tip 3 is talk about 2 ideas, but if you need to fill more time, only then use your second idea, students. Okay? If you're talking about one particular sport, if you have explained everything that you have in your brain and you still need to cover time, you can just try speaking on a second sport that you would like to try. But students, please be relevant. Don't go off track, please. Otherwise, it would affect your band score, students. Clear? Okay then. Now moving to the next category. I hope you're not getting bored, because see, the information we share in our live sessions is completely different from whatever you can find on the internet or whatever you may just have on different websites. Okay? And this information is never shared even in the classes. Okay, whether we have the online classes or the offline classes, this information is never shared by anyone. Okay, you directly start with your speaking part. Okay, fine. So I have come today with this information so that all the candidates who are just struggling with the explanation part, who are just confused, about what actually a cue card is, what to do if we get something new to talk about. Okay, so you may have a lot of help, okay, in having a good band score. Because I have been training a lot of students and I have been doing the same for many years. And most of the candidates, whether they are appearing for their general training test or their, you can say, academic test, they have, a lot of queries and questions on the same. Like they keep asking me, ma'am, we are doing a lot of topics for our cue card preparation. But what if we get all of a sudden, a difficult topic in our test? What if we get something which we have never tried? Okay, so how to stretch our speech at that time? What ideas should we add at that time? Like what is the plan for the same, ma'am? So today I have just explained everything in my life so that everyone out there whosoever is trying to prepare for, their IELTS exam, speaking would become really easy. And the part cue card, that is the part 2, would really be not a particular part where you find yourself, lagging behind. Okay? So, let's come back to the explanation of this category. Cue cards that ask you to describe a favorite thing. I have taken an example as describe a book that you enjoyed reading. You can even have a topic as describe your favorite book. Okay, describe your favorite room, describe your favorite car, describe your favorite mobile phone. Okay, like it can be anything. Okay, so let me talk about this topic now. Describe a book that you enjoyed reading. Now this is the only card where telling the truth is not always the best idea. What I mean is, students, most of you might not have favorite things to talk about. As if someone asks me, what's your favorite color? Or, talk about your favorite book. I would not have, the idea to talk upon, because telling the truth may just keep you, you can say, keep you back from explaining it for 2 minutes. Okay, if you are telling the truth, it would only take 2 to 3 lines or sentences to explain, and then you will be quiet. Fine. So what you have to do is, the plots of some films are much easier to describe than others. For example, let me tell you, I love the film Fight Club. Okay, that's my favorite movie. But then again, I don't think I could summarize the plot easily in 2 minutes. That means I can't just give the description and I can just stretch my answer for 2 minutes on this particular movie. On the other hand, I absolutely hate the film Titanic, to be honest. But it is pretty easy to summarize, as long as you know the word iceberg. Okay. Now, my point is that you should think not just about the truth, but what you can actually describe. I mean, be good at cooking stories, students. Okay? Try to cook a story whenever you have, less number of ideas. Okay? Then, top tips for cue cards on your favorite items. Tip number 1, think about and practice these cards before the exam to make sure that you are able to describe your favorites. That means here you require to practice a lot of topics, students. Okay, adding a situation will also work wonders if you fall short in your ideas. Fine. Okay. Now, moving to the next category. The cue cards that ask you to describe a cultural event or item. Cultural event or item? It may be about any festival, it may be about any occasion that is celebrated. It can be anything, students. I have taken one example and that says describe a food that is eaten at a special time in your country. Any food that is eaten at a special time in your country. Most of you will go with rice pudding, that is kheer. Okay, that's even our traditional food, and like we eat it at a lot of special times, like you can say Muslims eat it at, you can say, the occasion such as Eid. I hope I'm going correct in my information. Okay, so now I love these type of questions, students. As an examiner, I get a chance to sit back and find out something interesting about the culture of the student I am testing. That means, if you have got such topic, you need to talk about your culture. That would really be much interesting for the examiner, okay, because it's something interesting, something different from, you can say, the routine type of talks. Okay. Now, however, I have noticed that students often struggle when describing their own culture. Why? See, whenever you have to talk about your own culture, you need to use certain type of words that really don't have an English translation. I hope that's really true. Like, there are a lot of words, that we use in our native language, and these don't have any translation in English. So what you have to do at that time? Now, my advice here would be, don't try to translate. In Russia, now, where one of my friends lives, many people have a house in the country, okay? And these type of houses are called as a dacha. Dacha. There is literally no translation for this word, okay? So trying to find one is a waste of time. Now, instead of pausing to search for the translation, which actually will, take a lot of time, and, it will really affect your fluency, your coherence, your score overall, what you can do is just tell the examiner the word in your local language. For example, students, every weekend I go to stay in my friend's house in the country. I don't know what the word is in English, but we call it a dacha. Okay? This is 100% fine and much more natural than trying to give a translation. What I mean is, sometimes some students have some Hindi words and they find, it's really difficult to translate in English. Okay? So what you can do is, you can use Hindi words, but just you need to clear out the things to the examiner. Okay? Just first give the explanation, then use that word. As I have done over here for you, I'm saying I don't know what the word is in English, but we call it a dacha. Okay? Now the examiners really feel happy when you give explanations, on your culture, on your religion, on, the things that are really new to them. Okay? Now also, even if the examiner is from your country or from your region, it is totally fine to explain the local tradition to him or her as if he has never ever heard of it before. Even though that might seem strange, obviously. Now the students ask me a question, ma'am, what if the examiner is from our own region? And if we explain a tradition that people follow in my region, so would it sound something, strange if the person already knows about it? What if I go wrong in my explanation? Students, I always answer these type of students that you don't have to worry about what your examiner believes or thinks. Always deliver your answer, always deliver your responses, give the response as if the person sitting in front has nothing to do with the topic. As if he or she is new to whatever you are explaining. Clear? Okay then. Top tips for the cue cards on cultural event or item. Tip number 1 is, don't worry about using words from your native language to describe cultural items if you don't know the translation. Okay? Just explain clearly what it is. Explanation is really important, students, if you use certain words from your native language. Tip number 2 is, even if your examiner is from your country, from your region, pretend, I repeat, pretend that he has never heard of that event or item and feel free to describe it fully. You don't have to worry about anything. Just feel free to describe it fully. Okay? Moving to the next category. The cue cards that ask you to describe something crazy. Now there are a lot of topics that don't fall under the above mentioned categories, okay, or the categories I have explained so far. And these type of topics are totally unpredictable. So if you get one of these questions, my advice is to take a deep breath and answer the question as best as you can. Okay? I have taken an example over here. Describe something useful you learned in a lesson at primary school. Now, obviously, as we have grown up so far, and moving back to the time of our primary school is a bit, you can say, difficult. So what you can do is try to do your best. Try to give best over here. What you can do is you can start up the explanation by saying that it's really difficult for me to go back to my primary school and think about, something that I have learned. Okay? Like your examiner will be aware that the topic is strange. Okay? So he or she will be impressed by anything you give as an answer. Basically, they just check your spontaneity, your confidence, and your language skills. Okay? Now also, it is totally fine to start your 2 minutes by explaining what you find or why you find this particular topic difficult or strange. Again, I'm just, elaborating it. Here you could definitely start by saying, well, I am 43 years old. Now you don't have to copy the same sentence, students, as some of you might be at your 30s or some of you might be in your 20s. Okay? So, well, and I am also not 43 years of my age, to be honest. Okay? So, well, I am 43 years old. So it is a bit of a strange and struggle, you can say, thing, remembering anything that I learned at my primary school. I also hate mathematics, so it is probably the worst subject you could have asked me about. However, what I do remember is, and you can just continue with a particular thing that you remember. Okay? This would not only sound natural, but it would also take about 20 to 30 seconds of your time. It would cover your time, Okay, students? So now the top tips for the cue cards on something crazy. The very first thing you need to do is stay calm. Don't panic, students. Even if something new, something different, something difficult comes to you, you just need to stay calm. Okay? Be positive. Start your 2 minutes by explaining why you think the topic is difficult. Okay? Now, do your best to address the card as fully as you can. Whatever you can explain, just do that. Okay? Because your examiner knows that it is a hard question. So just do your best. Clear? So, these were different categories under, you can say, which most of the topics fall. Rather, all the topics fall. Okay? So, if you just focus on these type of topics, you can just prepare every type of cue card that can come in your final speaking test. Okay? So, that's all in my today's live, students. Thank you so much for being so attentive, so patient, and I hope that the ideas, given by me and the tips shared by me come up to be really helpful for you all. Okay? If you feel happy attending our lives, students, you may even join our online classes. Okay? And just feel free to contact us. I have shared, the numbers of our offices, okay, with you. And then again, just follow us on different platforms. Subscribe our YouTube channel, students, so that you may keep getting the notifications. You may keep getting the, you can say, video, you can say notifications whenever we share something. Okay. Fine. And stay tuned until the next live of ours. Okay. Good day, students. Thank you. Gurinder Jeet Kaur, this side again. Take care.